Welcome to the Kill Count, where we tally up the victims in all our favorite horror movies. I'm James A. Janice, and today we're looking at Wes Craven's New Nightmare, a peculiar little film written and directed by Wes Craven and released in 1994. In retrospect, New Nightmare looks like a dry run for Scream, which Craven would direct a mere 2 years later. That's because this is probably the most meta movie you've ever seen, unless you're a huge fan of Living in Oblivion. Because Bob Shaye likes money, he wanted to bring Freddy Krueger back from the dead, and he asked Wes Craven to helm the resurrection. Craven rewatched all the sequels and decided, well, this is a fucking mess, so he came back with an idea he'd been kicking around since the Dream Warriors era about Freddy Krueger infiltrating the real world. For maximum meta impact, Craven brought back Heather Langenkamp, who played Nancy Thompson in Nightmares 1 and 3, to play a fictional version of herself, living in Los Angeles and struggling with her own Freddy nightmares as the 10-year anniversary of the original approaches. Even though they killed Freddy off in the final Nightmare, in this movie everyone wants to bring him back, including Robert Englund himself. But Heather's reluctant to get on board, since now she's the mother of a small impressionable young boy, and because things have been a little weird for her lately. New Nightmare stands outside the continuity of the first 6 films and reins Freddy back in on a real short leash. This is not the Looney Tune clownish killer of Nightmares 3 through 6. The new Freddy is dark and scary and wears a friggin' trench coat. He's even got a brand new finger knife glove, which actually isn't really a glove because he's actually not really Freddy. You'll understand in a little bit, maybe. In the meantime, let's get to the kills. The movie begins like the original Nightmare, with a dude building a glove, but instead of the scene being picture-in-picture and dirty, now it's full screen and metal. So fucking metal, this dude cuts off his own hand! Good thing it's just a movie, so I guess it was picture-in-picture. Visiting this hot set is Heather Langenkamp and her son Dylan, because her husband Chase is in charge of VFX. Director Wes Craven is real happy with Chase and his team's effects.
Chuck Terry, Great Blood?
Yeah, great blood, guys. Real A-positive work. Too bad their work is so good that it ends up coming to life. The glove jumps up and takes Chase by surprise, cutting his finger, and then gets way more lethal when it freaking stabs this tech Chuck in the throat. It digs its claws in deep, and Chuck ends up falling over onto his boss and dying right there in his Chase face. The mechanical glove runs around like a mecha master hand, eventually knocking down the other tech, Terry, and killing him by hopping on his chest and kind of just pricking at him with his fingers. You'd think it would go a little deeper there, huh? With the grunt work done, the glove goes to move up the ladder and attack Chase, but as Heather Langenkamp screams, she wakes up in her house, which is currently doing a really good impression of Jello, because it's alive! I mean, it's not actually alive, that's just an earthquake, and Heather and Chase cower over young Dylan to protect him. When it's all over, Chase finds a cut on his finger just like the one from his dream. Dun dun dun. Kinda fun fact, I guess, filming on this movie just so happened to coincide with the huge Northridge earthquake. So this is real quake footage we're seeing on the TV that morning as Heather gets ready for an interview. Chase is on his way out too, headed to a remote shoot for a few days. Heather's all like, gotcha butt, and that must be one good luck butt, because as soon as it leaves, shit goes awry. First, a residual tremor cracks Heather's wall open into a Freddy slash. Then she finds Dylan watching OG Nightmare, and when she tries to give some parental guidance, he starts screaming and freaking out. And finally, the phone rings and it's a harasser who's been giving her shit for the past 6 weeks, talking like Freddy and singing them Jump Rope Girl songs.
Hello?
Freddy's coming for you!
Good thing babysitter Julie is there to take a little off Heather's plate. She's watching over Dylan as Heather gets picked up for her interview by a kinda creepy limo driver who recognizes Heather from the Nightmare movies. He has the same opinion about them as me.
The first was the best.
She's being interviewed about the 10th anniversary of the original Nightmare film. And as a big ol' surprise for her, Robert Englund is brought out in full Freddy regalia. This is probably my favorite scene in the movie, in no small part due to the late night talk show band remix of the Nightmare theme. Hell yeah. Everyone is flipping out over Freddy because they want him to come back after Freddy's dead. And Robert Englund is absolutely loving it. Check out his enthusiasm in this amazing shot as he quotes himself.
You are all my children now!
Heather gets a call from Sarah Risher at New Line Cinema, again, an actual person who, as you can see, was a producer on every Nightmare movie besides Freddy's Dead, and heads over to New Line Cinema where Sarah greets her and brings her into the office of, wait for it, Bob Shaye. Yep, it's Mr. New Line / Freddy 2 Leather Daddy himself, Bob Shaye. He asks Heather if she'll star in a new Nightmare movie that Wes has been writing, but she's not that interested because now she has a kid.
Oh, come on, Heather. Kids love horror.
I mean, he ain't wrong if my comment section's any indication. As a Hail Mary, Bob mentions that Chase is already down to help out on it and has been working on a new Freddy glove prototype for a while without Heather knowing. When she gets home, she hears screaming and runs inside to find Dylan freaking out and doing a creepy voice that sounds like a mix between Danny Torrance and Donald Duck. When he calms down, he tells her that his stuffed dinosaur Rex saved him, and boy, has Rex got the scars to prove it. Give that dino a purple heart. Heather calls Chase on set, where his prototype Freddy glove sits nearby, and he mentions that neither Chuck nor Terry came into work. Cause yeah, spoiler, their dream deaths in the beginning were real. When Heather tells Chase about Dylan's freaky episode and the harassing phone call, he takes off for the 3-hour drive home, not noticing that the new glove he was working on is missing from the workbench now. Story time for Dylan is the end of Hansel and Gretel, where they burned that witch in the oven. And obviously, since I'm pointing it out, that's gonna come back later. He shows her how Rex is chilling at the foot of his bed to keep the mean man with the claws away.
He's my guard.
Aw, Rex is the best! Heather tries to show Dylan that there's nothing to be afraid of, but he tells her it's different when she's gone. Looks like Chase is bringing his work home with him, because during his sleepy drive, some Freddy claws pop up and start jawsing at his crotch. But after determining it's not that interesting, the claw goes for the chest instead, stabbing Chase and tearing open his torso, which causes him to lose control of his truck. The truck veers off the road and Chase is ultimately killed in the ensuing accident. Heather wakes up from a nightmare of the crash, but when the police show up at her door, they tell her that shit's real life and that her husband is dead. She goes to the hospital to identify the body, and although the coroner would prefer to only show her his face, she insists on looking at more, finding Freddy slashes in his chest and throwing up at the sight of it. Chase's funeral is decked out with silent cameos from the likes of Tuesday Knight and Jesus Garcia, Rod from the first movie. There's also quite a gala blowing, and it gets so powerful, Chase's casket slips into the grave. When Heather goes to fix that one little slip, she trips and bangs her head, then looks up to find Dylan being carried away by Freddy down into a little coffin cubby. She chases after him into the comfiest looking place I have ever seen, but sadly they can't chill down there because of the whole murderous glove thing. Things get worse when her dead husband starts coming onto her, so it's a good thing she gets pulled out of this nightmare by the sax man himself, John Saxon, who played her dad in the movies and who now points out that everything's okay. That night she comes downstairs to find Dylan totally transfixed by his mom's early work. Man, that's gotta be weird for Heather Langenkamp, looking at that. He tells her there's a dream man trying to come up into their world, and that wins him a VIP ticket to a mommy slumber party. Except mommy might not be slumbering all that much, because she's back to some real Nancy Thompson habits, drinking coffee in bed. She meets up with John Saxon, because in this movie the two of them are really good friends, and that makes me so freaking happy. I hope it's true in real life too. He comforts her and tells her she's probably just stressed from the harassing phone caller. While they're gabbing though, Dylan's making his way up to the top of a tall ass rocket ship, accompanied by some music that might just be a little too much. He ends up falling, but Heather manages to intercept him on the way down and save herself a second funeral in 1 week. Heather checks her mail and finds a creepy burnt up letter in it, apparently not the first time she's gotten one of these bad boys. Troubled, she calls up Robert Englund and tells him she's been dreaming of Krueger, but not his Flanderized Freddy.
It isn't you. He's scarier. He's
Darker. More evil?
Seems like Robert's been taken by Freddy Mania too, since he's apparently spending his free time painting Puppet Master Nosferatu Freddy. He also mentions what he's heard from Wes's new script, and it sounds exactly like what happened to Dylan on the playground. When Heather is sleeping that night, she gets a visit from the new and improved finger knives, which give us a nice long look at themselves as they reach out towards her. Check it out, a fifth finger knife. Yeah, the thumb's not a finger. Shut up, I'm not gonna call them phalange knives. Heather wakes up and avoids getting the claw for now, but she does come downstairs to find Dylan being weird again and singing Jump Rope Girls.
7, 8, better stay up late.
Man, what kind of songs they putting on Kids Bop these days? Then Dylan takes a set of homemade finger knives and friggin' slashes at his mom with them. Kid, your finger's looking shabby as hell. You need to get to razorgloves.com, son. Heather wakes up suddenly, because fuck ending that scene, I guess, and now it's morning. Too bad Dylan's still being a little weirdo, having figured out the puzzle mommy's been keeping in her drawer. The phone rings and Heather answers it to find a callback to the boyfriend now line from the original. Dylan throws up and starts convulsing again, and you know what? Honestly, this makes me just not want to have kids. This shit's too much, man. I'm good. She takes him to the hospital where Dr. Hefner tells her he needs to stay overnight. Oh, and look, the nurse is Lynn Shade, the teacher from the original, and Elise Rainier from Insidious. But Dylan doesn't trust demonologists, so he fakes taking the sleeping pill she gave him. Heather leaves to go to Wes Craven's house, driving past some more real earthquake destruction as she does. Seriously, it's crazy that the script had an earthquake in it before Northridge happened. Kind of freaky, actually. Wes tells Heather the script has been coming to him in his dreams, and that it's about some ancient evil entity that takes many forms. Its latest form is Freddy, and apparently the Nightmare movies have been keeping him restrained.
For 10 years, he's been held captive pretty much as Freddy in the Nightmare on Elm Street series, but now that the films have ended, the genie's out of the bottle.
Okay, that's pretty fucking wonky, Wes, but I'm gonna let you finish, I guess. He says the entity wants to come into the real world, but there's a person who can stop him.
That person's you, Heather.
Yeah, because she gave Nancy Thompson strength, and Nancy was the first one to defeat Freddy. So Wes is writing a script to defeat the Freddy entity, but he needs Heather to play Nancy again to seal the deal. Cue a super meta moment where his screenplay has exactly the same dialogue that we just heard before it ends with a meta dissolve. On TV that night, Heather sees a report that Terry and Chuck were found slashed to death that morning, but the news is cut short by another friggin' earthquake. At least the only other bad thing that happens is Heather's coffee pot getting broken.
Miss me?
Oh yeah, and also the pissed off Freddy entity is here. He attacks Heather, who fights back in a very Nancy Thompson way, but he only manages a forearm slash before another earthquake rocks him away and he disappears. Heather speedwalks to the hospital where she finds Julie, who had a bad dream about Dylan and has come to check on him. When Hefner sees that Heather's arm is all bloody, she takes care of her and patches it up. But she also mentions that there wasn't a fresh earthquake that night, meaning Heather must have been experiencing a Krueger-quake. Hefner also notes that Dylan's been afraid of Freddy Krueger and gets super judgy, assuming Heather has shown her kid the movies, even though, as Heather argues,
every kid knows knows who Freddy is. He's like Santa Claus or King Kong.
While she watches over him that night, Dylan wakes up and starts doing your standard creepy horror kid stuff, up to and including a full-on Reagan McNeil. Nasty. Some doctors run in and restrain Heather as Hefner decides on drastic measures.
Cut this evil out of him.
Then she turns into Freddy and Heather wakes up, leaping onto Dylan's empty hospital bed. It was just a nightmare, but it's one that gave her another gray rogue hair streak. She starts wilding out and going into off-limit areas of the hospital.
Do you have a pass? Screw your pass.
She finds Dylan and Julie, but all that kid wants to talk about is his dinosaur. So she says she'll go get Rex from home.
You know that home isn't far from here, right?
Right across the freeway.
That's right.
But she doesn't make it out of the hospital, instead getting pulled into this back room that says dispensary on the door. But I don't think it's the same kind of dispensary as the one down the street with the green neon lights all over it, you know what I mean? Some nurses come in and sedate Dylan against Julie's wishes, so despite her trying to keep him awake, the little feller can't help but fall asleep. The evil Freddy entity shows up, rising behind Julie and sporting his new green hat and Matrix duster. He takes a big swing at the babysitter, and her scream brings some nurses to the room who find her floating in the air. Julie is thrown against the wall by the Freddy entity, but Dylan is the only one who can see him.
Ever played Skin the Cat?
That means he's the only witness as the Frentity starts dragging Julie up the wall. In a truly awesome twist on the first ever Freddy Krueger kill, we get to actually see the Freddy entity in action, dragging Julie up the wall and across the ceiling to the center of the room. Julie does a great Tina impression when she stretches out her arm for help, but Dylan does a pretty piss-poor Rod in response. Then the evil entity breaks her neck against the ceiling and Julie falls to the floor dead. This kick-ass kill is sadly undercut by Dylan's poopy pants face as he screams for Rex. Heather runs to the room and finds Julie's body, but no Dylan to speak of. She drives off to find him and sees him climbing up the bank to get back home on his own, just across the freeway, you know? He sees Freddy in the clouds and that spurs him onward to cross the road, as if driving in LA wasn't hellacious enough already. Heather follows as Cloud Freddy takes his sky claw and dangles Dylan over heavy traffic for shits and gigs. She gets a nice little action hero moment when she ducks under an out-of-control semi-truck, but then she gets friggin' pwned by a sedan and winds up lying in the middle of the road. Dylan doesn't wait around for her because he sees a weird-looking army of Freddys rushing towards the road. Heather eventually gets home where John Saxon is waiting for her since she called him on the way there. He doesn't believe her that Freddy's behind this, of course, but he's also acting a little weird. He keeps calling her Nancy.
Why are you calling me Nancy, John?
Why are you calling me John?
Hell, he's even wearing his old Donnie Thompson badge. While they argue over identities, the Freddy entity comes out of the bed and tears himself into reality with a pretty badass peekaboo, then follows it up with a classy Nosferatu illusion. Heather senses that if she wants to get on with this, she's gonna have to play the part of Nancy.
I love you too, Daddy.
John Saxon takes off, and look where we at. Oh, hell yeah, it's the motherfucking Elm Street house. Meta or not, we in this bitch. Inside, she finds Dylan's unused sleeping pills, which lead to his room in a Hansel and Gretel style path. In the room, Heather finds, oh shit, yo, is that Rex? Oh, my boy. Not you, Rex. Not you, Rex. It's just a little evisceration. He's still good. He's still good. Heather takes one of the sleeping pills so she can join up with her son in Dreamland, which she gets to by way of an amazing sheet tunnel slide. Haha, this is fun. It eventually turns into a water slide that exits from an awesome giant Freddy head waterfall that deposits Heather down into the labyrinth zone from the original Sonic the Hedgehog. Armed with only a single knife against the Freddy Entities 5, Heather wanders around calling out for her son. She finds a script on the ground which describes exactly what's going on right now in another meta moment, and almost knifes her kid in the face when he sneaks up on her from behind. But then the Freddy entity comes up and attacks her, tossing her into a snake puddle and spitting out lines that are only like Freddy's on the surface.
Take a pet for the Rugrat, bitch.
Yeah, dude, like you're sounding way too mean when you say it. Heather fights him off with an eel to the eye in a very non-Nancy Thompson-like line. Fuck you! But he manages to regain the upper hand. Before he can land a big overhead swipe on her though, Dylan stabs him in the leg with the knife, saving his mom but putting himself in the Freddy entity's crosshairs. He runs away and the FE tosses Heather into the pool so he can run in scary slow-mo and chase Dylan right into a little oven. The door to it is just too small for the entity to make his way inside. But that's why Freddy was built with extendable arms, and has been since Mark 1. Heather finally comes to and rushes to go save her kid, but she gets slowed down by some moldy toothpaste steps and a fun callback. That almost gives the Freddy entity enough time to dislocate his jaw and get his maw gaping like that scary thing from Beetlejuice. Even gets Dylan's head halfway inside to yum eat him up before Heather manages to stab him in the back, which makes him give Dylan up. She shoves him into the oven, Hansel and Gretel style, but he comes back at her with a crazy tongue attack that wraps around her head. Fun fact, Heather Langenkamp said this was her least favorite thing she ever had to film in a Nightmare movie, probably because of all the lube on the tongue prop and the inappropriate comments she was getting from the dudes on the crew. Lucky for fictional Heather, Dylan is able to find another way out of the oven, and he rescues his mom by taking the Fred entity's tongue and stabbing it to the ground with the knife. The entity cries out out as the tongue splits into a fork and retracts like a scary tape measure, knocking him back into the oven. Dylan locks him inside and lights that mother up with a lever. We don't need no water, let the Freddy demon burn. Burn, Freddy demon, burn. Oh damn, maybe don't burn so scary at the end there. That's some real messed up looking shit, dude. Heather and Dylan run away from a whole bunch of fire explosions that tear apart the Freddy entity's entire world, destroying it once and for all. Mother and son jump into that little pool and come out through Dylan's bed, safely in his room, as long as, you know, you're not like breathing too much of that smoke. Also in the room is a script signed by Wes thanking Heather for a stellar performance as Nancy. The movie ends with Heather reading the script to Dylan as a story, because what little boy doesn't want to hear the one about how his dad got murdered by an evil entity? After all that meta action, I'm not sure what's real and what's not anymore. I think I need to find my bearings with some cold hard math, so let's get to the numbers. Come on, Rex, you'll protect me. Except you're pretty green. It's a green screen over there, so second thought, stay there, buddy. Aside from Rex, who the Freddy entity murdered so mercilessly, there were 5 victims in Wes Craven's New Nightmare. 3 were dudes, 1 was a lady, and the last was an evil entity that took the form of Freddy Krueger. But I guess that's a male incarnation, so here, have this pie chart. With a runtime of 112 minutes, by far the longest movie of the series, that comes out to a non-Rex kill on average every 22.4 minutes. I'll give the golden chainsaw for coolest kill to Julie. I love Tina's kill in the original, and this rehashing of it does what all remakes should do. It adds something to it. Seeing Freddy drag her around like that was like seeing the source code to an old favorite video game. I loved it. Doll machete for lamest kill will be Terry, whose chest wounds didn't look near deep enough to kill him. And that's it. Wes Craven's New Nightmare came out in 1994, and Robert Englund has said it's his favorite Nightmare movie. The world wouldn't see Freddy on the big screen again until 2003, when Englund donned the razor glove one last time for the ultimate horror crossover. You'll get a special edition kill count on that movie tomorrow, and until then, I'm James A. Janice. This has been the Kill Count. Thanks a lot for watching my Kill Count on Wes Craven's New Nightmare. I want to thank a couple of my patrons like Felicia Snyder and Clint Glass. I love Rex so much. This isn't like an official Nightmare Rex, but I think I did a pretty good job finding a similar dinosaur. And of course, Chelsea's the one who did the awesome slash mark sewing. This is just cotton balls and red thread. Tomorrow's an all-new version of Freddy vs. Jason. All right, see y'all tomorrow. Be good people.